In the spring of 1814, beneath the wisteria-draped arbours of Hartwell Manor, a young woman of considerable fortune found herself trapped between duty and desire. The gardens whispered secrets that night, secrets that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of Regency propriety. What began as a stolen moment under the stars would ignite a scandal so consuming it would rewrite the destiny of everyone it touched. But the kiss that promised everything would first destroy her completely. If you are listening to this story, do not forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Hartwell Manor, casting geometric patterns across the Persian carpets that adorned Miss Arabella Hartwell's private sitting room. She sat before her writing desk, a letter from her father opened before her. Though she had read its contents so many times, the words had begun to blur together. The message was simple, decisive, and utterly immutable. Her betrothal to Viscount Edmund Blackwood would be announced at the Midsummer Ball, precisely 6 weeks hence. Arabella was 20 years old, possessed of a modest fortune inherited from her late mother, and blessed with what society termed a pleasing countenance. Her chestnut hair caught the light in shades of amber and gold, and her grey-blue eyes held an intelligence that often made her male acquaintances uncomfortable. She had been raised in the countryside of Hampshire, educated beyond what was strictly necessary for a young woman of her station, and had harboured until recently romantic notions about marriage that now seemed impossibly naive. The Viscount Blackwood was considered an excellent match. His family's lineage stretched back to the Norman conquest. Their estates were vast and profitable, and his connections at court were impeccable. He was 28, well-formed, and known for his meticulous attention to propriety. Arabella's father, Sir Richard Hartwell, had negotiated the arrangement with Viscount Blackwood's father over several months, and both patriarchs had declared themselves satisfied with the alliance. Arabella had met Edmund Blackwood 3 times. The first occasion had been at a county assembly, where he had danced with her precisely once before engaging her father in conversation about agricultural improvements for the remainder of the evening. The second meeting occurred when the Blackwoods had visited Hartwell Manor for dinner, during which Edmund had spoken extensively about his duties as magistrate and his plans to modernize his estate holdings. The third encounter had been at a garden party hosted by the local squire, where Edmund had walked beside her for exactly 15 minutes, commented favourably on the weather, and then excused himself to speak with several gentlemen about proposed legislation in Parliament. He had never once asked her opinion on anything. He had never inquired about her interests, her reading, or her thoughts on any subject whatsoever. He addressed her with the same courteous detachment he might employ with a pleasant but unremarkable piece of furniture that had been selected for his future household. Still, Arabella understood her duty. Her father was not a cruel man, merely a practical one. The Hartwell fortune, while respectable, was not inexhaustible, and her father had no son to carry on the family name. A connection to the Blackwoods would secure her future and elevate the family's position in society. It was what any sensible young woman would desire. She told herself this every morning when she woke. She repeated it like a catechism as she went about her daily routines, overseeing the household, practicing her pianoforte, reading improving literature in the library, and preparing for the role she would soon assume as Viscountess Blackwood. Her only respite came in the late afternoons when she could escape to the gardens. Hartwell Manor boasted extensive grounds, designed in the naturalistic style that had become fashionable in recent decades. There were formal parterres near the house, but beyond them lay winding paths through carefully cultivated wilderness, ornamental ponds, and a particularly lovely wisteria arbour that had been her mother's favourite retreat. It was in these gardens that Arabella allowed herself to dream. She would walk among the roses and imagine a different life, one where she might be valued for more than her dowry and connections. She imagined conversations that ranged beyond the weather and social obligations, companionship that included genuine affection, perhaps even love born of mutual respect and understanding. But such thoughts were dangerous, and she always returned to the house with her composure restored, ready to play her appointed role. The weeks passed with inexorable momentum toward the midsummer ball. The house bustled with preparations. Her father had invited every family of consequence within 30 miles. The Blackwoods would arrive 2 days before the event and stay as guests at Hartwell Manor. It would be, her father assured her with uncharacteristic warmth, a night she would remember for the rest of her life. Arabella's wardrobe was meticulously updated. A dressmaker from London spent a week at the manor, creating a ball gown of ivory silk embroidered with seed pearls and delicate gold thread. New gloves were ordered, new slippers. A pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother was retrieved from the family vault and restrung. 3 days before the ball, the Blackwoods arrived. Edmund's father, the Earl of Thornbury, was a stern man with iron-grey hair and penetrating dark eyes that seemed to assess everything and everyone according to some internal ledger of worth. His countess was a faded beauty who spoke little and seemed to exist primarily as an extension of her husband's will. Edmund himself arrived looking exactly as Arabella remembered. Tall, dark-haired, handsome in a severe way, his clothing impeccable, his manner correct. He greeted her with a formal bow and expressed his pleasure at seeing her again, in tones that suggested the sentiment was entirely conventional rather than heartfelt. That evening, the families dined together. The conversation revolved around politics, estate management, and the various distinguished guests who would attend the ball. Edmund sat across from Arabella and addressed perhaps a dozen remarks to her over the course of 3 hours, each one so mundane she could barely recall them moments later. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, while the gentlemen remained with their port and cigars. Lady Thornbury occupied herself with embroidery and said nothing. Arabella attempted to make conversation, asking about the Blackwood estates in Lincolnshire, but received only the briefest responses. It became clear that Lady Thornbury either had no interest in engaging with her future daughter-in-law or had been trained into such complete submission that she no longer possessed opinions to share. When the gentleman finally joined them, Arabella was asked to perform at the pianoforte. She played a Haydn sonata with competent precision, and when she finished, Edmund remarked that her performance was perfectly adequate. Her father beamed as though she had received the highest compliment imaginable. The following day brought still more preparations. The ballroom was decorated with thousands of hothouse flowers. The musicians arrived to rehearse. The kitchen staff worked to prepare an elaborate supper. Arabella submitted to hours with her lady's maid, who styled her hair in increasingly elaborate fashions, seeking the perfect arrangement for the ball. That afternoon, seeking escape from the overwhelming activity, Arabella slipped out to the gardens. The June weather was glorious, warm, but not oppressive, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of roses and honeysuckle. She made her way along the familiar paths toward the wisteria arbor, her sanctuary, the place where she could breathe freely. She did not know that someone else had discovered her retreat. She did not know that her carefully ordered world was about to shatter completely. As she rounded the corner near the ornamental fountain, she caught sight of a figure seated on the stone bench beneath the cascading purple blooms, a man she had never seen before. The stranger rose as Arabella approached, and she found herself arrested by the sight of him. He was perhaps 30 years of age, tall and broad-shouldered, with hair the color of autumn wheat touched by sun. His face was striking rather than conventionally handsome, with strong features and grey eyes that held both intelligence and something harder, something that spoke of experiences beyond the comfortable confines of English country life. He was dressed simply but well, his coat of excellent cut, though not ostentatiously fashionable. "Forgive me," he said, his voice carrying an accent she could not immediately place. Cultured, but with an undertone that suggested time spent abroad. "I did not mean to trespass in what appears to be a private sanctuary." Arabella should have retreated immediately. Every rule of propriety demanded it. Instead, she found herself responding, "You are a guest of my father's." In a manner of speaking, "I am recently returned from India and have business with Sir Richard regarding certain investments. My name is Alexander Thorne, though I possess no title to recommend me." His smile was self-deprecating. "I am merely the youngest son of a youngest son who made his fortune in trade. Your father was kind enough to extend an invitation to remain through the ball, as we have much to discuss regarding the East India Company ventures." "I see," Arabella said, though she was surprised her father had mentioned nothing of this guest. "I am Miss Hartwell." "Yes," Alexander said simply. "I deduced as much. Your father speaks of you with great pride." He paused, then added with careful courtesy, "He mentioned your approaching betrothal. Allow me to offer my congratulations." Something in his tone suggested the congratulations were merely conventional, and Arabella found herself responding with more honesty than she intended. "Thank you. It is a very suitable arrangement." "Suitable," Alexander repeated, as though tasting the word. "Yes, I imagine it is." His grey eyes held hers for a moment too long, and Arabella felt heat rise to her cheeks. She should leave. She should return to the house immediately. Instead, she heard herself saying, "You have been in India?" "For 8 years. I left England with nothing and returned with enough to be considered respectable, if not quite genteel." There was something both bitter and amused in his voice. "I have seen things that would shock the sensibilities of this peaceful corner of Hampshire." "I should like to hear of them," Arabella said, surprising herself. "That is, if you care to speak of your experiences." And so he did. They sat together in the wisteria arbor, and Alexander spoke of Calcutta and Bombay, of monsoons and maharajas, of markets filled with spices and silks, of dangers faced and fortunes made and lost. He spoke as though she were capable of understanding complexity, as though her opinion mattered, as though she existed as more than merely a decorative object to be admired and acquired. Arabella listened, entranced. She asked questions, and he answered them thoroughly, never condescending, never dismissing her curiosity as inappropriate. The afternoon sun shifted across the garden, and still they talked. About India, about literature. He had read more broadly than any man she had met, about philosophy and politics, and the changing world beyond the boundaries of Hartwell Manor. "You must think me terribly provincial," Arabella said at last, as the shadows began to lengthen. "On the contrary," Alexander said quietly, "I think you are a woman of considerable intelligence and curiosity, trapped in circumstances that allow neither to flourish." The words hung between them, dangerous and undeniable. Arabella rose quickly. "I must return to the house. It grows late." "Of course." Alexander stood as well. "Miss Hartwell, I apologize if I have spoken inappropriately. I have been too long away from polite society and have forgotten the boundaries." "You have said nothing improper," Arabella replied, though they both knew this was not entirely true. Everything about their conversation had been improper, not in content, but in the intimacy it had created between strangers. She hurried back to the house, her heart beating too quickly, her thoughts in tumult. That night at dinner, she finally met Alexander Thorne formally. He was seated far down the table, as befitted his status as a man of commerce rather than title. Edmund sat beside her, and the contrast between the two men was almost painful. Edmund spoke of crop yields. Alexander, when called upon by her father, spoke of entirely different worlds. And though he was careful to remain deferential, Arabella saw intelligence and vitality in every word he uttered. She barely slept that night. She told herself she was simply anxious about the ball, about the formal announcement of her betrothal. But she knew she was lying to herself. The ball arrived like a tidal wave. By 8 in the evening, Hartwell Manor blazed with light from every window. Carriages arrived in steady procession, disgorging elegantly dressed guests who exclaimed over the decorations and the refreshments and the excellence of the arrangements. Arabella stood in the receiving line beside her father, greeting each arrival with practiced grace. She wore her new gown, the pearls at her throat, her hair arranged in elaborate curls adorned with white roses. She looked, she knew, exactly as a prospective viscountess should look, beautiful, appropriate, utterly ornamental. Edmund stood with his parents across the ballroom, receiving his own share of congratulations from guests who had already heard rumors of the impending announcement. He looked supremely confident, master of his domain, a man who had acquired exactly what he wanted through proper channels and appropriate negotiation. The dancing began. Edmund led Arabella out for the first set, and they moved through the figures with mechanical precision. He complimented her gown. She thanked him. He remarked that the evening was proceeding splendidly. She agreed. They might have been discussing the arrangement of furniture. Between sets, Arabella caught sight of Alexander Thorne standing near one of the windows. He was watching her, and even across the crowded ballroom, she felt the weight of his gaze. When the music began again, Edmund was claimed by duty to dance with other ladies of consequence, and Arabella found herself briefly alone. Alexander approached. "Miss Hartwell, would you honor me with this dance?" She should refuse. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to refuse. Instead, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the floor. The dance was a waltz, still considered slightly scandalous in some circles, requiring far greater proximity than the country dances that had preceded it. Alexander's hand settled at her waist, and Arabella felt the touch through every layer of silk and propriety. "You look like a princess from a fairy tale," Alexander said quietly as they began to move. "Beautiful and utterly unreachable." "Mr. Thorne," Arabella began, but he interrupted gently. "Forgive me. I know I should not speak thus, but I find I cannot remain silent." His grey eyes held hers with burning intensity. "I have traveled the world, Miss Hartwell. I have seen wonders and horrors, but I have never encountered anyone quite like you. Your mind, your spirit, the light that shines from you when you speak of things that interest you, it is extraordinary, and it is about to be extinguished completely." "You know nothing of my circumstances," Arabella whispered, though her voice shook. "I know that you deserve to be cherished, not merely possessed. I know that you deserve a partner who values your intelligence, not one who tolerates it as an unfortunate excess. I know—" He stopped himself, and when he spoke again, his voice was raw. "I know that I have no right to speak any of this. I am nobody. I have no title, no ancient name, nothing to offer but money earned through trade, and you are promised to another." The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of guests, and yet Arabella felt as though they were entirely alone. "I must return to my party," she managed to say. "Of course." Alexander bowed formally, but as he straightened he said in a voice only she could hear, "But if you ever wish for something different, something true, you need only say the word." Arabella fled, making her way through the crowd toward the doors that led to the terrace. She needed air. She needed space to think, to regain her composure before the announcement that would seal her fate forever. The terrace was blessedly empty, illuminated only by moonlight and the glow from the ballroom windows. Arabella gripped the stone balustrade and drew in deep breaths of the night air. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She turned, expecting a chaperone come to fetch her back to propriety. Instead, she found Edmund. "There you are," he said, his tone mildly reproving. "Your father will be making the announcement shortly. It would not do to be absent." "I needed a moment," Arabella said. The ballroom was stifling. Edmund moved closer, studying her with an expression she could not read. "I observed your dance with that Thorne fellow, the merchant. He is a guest of my father's. Indeed, and clearly one who does not know his place." Edmund's voice hardened. "You allowed him liberties, Arabella. You permitted him to hold you too close, to speak to you with undue familiarity. It was noted by several guests. We danced one waltz, nothing more, and even that was inappropriate. He is nobody." betrayed, barely a gentleman despite his fortune. Edmund's hand shot out and gripped her arm with surprising force. "When you are my wife, you will conduct yourself with greater discretion. You will not encourage the attentions of men beneath your station. You will be a credit to the Blackwood name. Is that understood?" Arabella stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "You speak as though I am property you have purchased. Are you not?" Edmund's smile was cold. "Your father and I have reached an agreement. You come with your dowry and your connections, and in return you receive my name and my protection. That is the nature of marriage, Arabella. Surely you are not so naive as to imagine otherwise." Something inside Arabella splintered. "And if I were to refuse?" Edmund laughed, an ugly sound. "Refuse? On what grounds? Because a merchant with an exotic history paid you attention at a ball? Do not be absurd. You will marry me because that is what has been decided. Your feelings on the matter are utterly irrelevant." He released her arm and stepped back, adjusting his cravat with precise movements. "Now compose yourself and return to the ballroom. It is time for the announcement. Try to look pleased. It would not do for the guests to think you anything less than overjoyed." He turned and walked back inside, leaving Arabella alone on the terrace, trembling with rage and humiliation and a growing certainty that she could not, would not, submit to this fate. She heard the music stop inside, heard her father's voice beginning to address the assembled guests, heard the expectant murmur of the crowd, and in that moment, Arabella made a choice. She walked quickly along the terrace to the stairs that led down into the gardens. The paths were dark, but she knew them intimately. She ran, her silk gown catching on branches, the pearls bouncing at her throat. She found him in the wisteria arbor, as though he had been waiting for her, as though he had known she would come. "Mr. Thorne," she gasped, breathless. "Alexander!" He stood, moving toward her with concern written across his face. "Miss Hartwell, what has happened?" "I cannot marry him," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I cannot spend my life as an object to be displayed and controlled. I cannot extinguish everything I am for the sake of duty and propriety. I cannot—" "Arabella," Alexander said, catching her hands in his. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you spoke of something true, something real, and I find that I want that more than safety, more than suitability, more than everything I have been taught to value." She looked up at him, her grey-blue eyes meeting his grey ones. "Even if it destroys me, I want one moment of genuine feeling, one moment where I'm not merely performing a role." "If we are discovered," Alexander began, but she interrupted. "Let them discover us. Let the scandal come. At least it will be real." They stood in the moonlit garden, the distant sounds of the ball drifting on the night air. And then Alexander cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was everything propriety forbade. It was passion and tenderness, desperation and hope. It was the world reshaping itself around a single moment of stolen connection. Arabella felt herself dissolve and reform, becoming someone entirely new, someone who had chosen desire over duty, truth over convention. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "What have we done?" he whispered. "Something unforgivable," Arabella replied, "and I do not regret it for an instant." It was then that they heard the voice from the shadows. "Neither do I," said a woman, stepping into the moonlight. Arabella spun around to find Charlotte Ashford, daughter of a neighbouring baronet and Arabella's supposed friend since childhood. Charlotte's face was illuminated with malicious triumph. "What a delicious scene," Charlotte said, her voice honeyed with false sympathy. "The betrothed Miss Hartwell discovered in passionate embrace with a merchant of no consequence on the very night of her engagement announcement. Oh, this is better than I could have dreamed." "Charlotte," Arabella began, but the other woman laughed. "Did you think no one noticed when you fled the ballroom? Did you imagine your little rebellion would go unobserved?" Charlotte's eyes glittered in the moonlight. "I have always envied you, Arabella. Your fortune, your prospects, the way men of quality sought your hand. And now I will have the pleasure of watching it all crumble to dust." She turned to leave, clearly intent on carrying the news back to the ballroom, but Alexander moved to block her path. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, dangerously, "perhaps we might discuss this matter rationally." "There is nothing to discuss, Mr. Thorne. Or should I say, nothing you could offer that would interest me. You are merely a merchant, after all. I, however, have just been presented with information worth far more than gold." Charlotte's smile was vicious. "By tomorrow morning, all of society will know that Miss Hartwell is a woman of loose morals, entirely unsuitable for any respectable marriage. Viscount Blackwood will withdraw his offer naturally, and Sir Richard's reputation will be shattered by his daughter's disgrace." She stepped around Alexander and hurried back toward the house, her laughter floating behind her like poison. Arabella sank onto the stone bench, all strength leaving her legs. "What have I done?" she whispered. "I have destroyed everything. My father, my reputation, my entire future." Alexander knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. "No, whatever comes, we will face it together. I will marry you, Arabella, immediately. I have enough fortune to keep you in comfort, and we can leave England if necessary. India, perhaps, or America. Somewhere far from this suffocating society and its impossible rules." "You do not understand," Arabella said, looking at him through tears. "My father will be ruined. He has built his entire life around connections and reputation. When this becomes known, when Edmund Blackwood withdraws his offer, my father will lose his standing among the gentry. His business ventures will suffer. Everything he has worked for will be destroyed because of my selfishness. Your desire for genuine happiness is not selfishness, is it not?" Arabella pulled her hands free and stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "I knew the consequences. I chose to kiss you anyway, knowing it could lead to discovery. I valued one moment of feeling over a lifetime of duty, and now everyone I care for will pay the price." From the house came the sounds of commotion. Raised voices. The music had stopped completely. "They know," Arabella said dully. "Charlotte has told them." Within moments, Sir Richard burst into the garden, his face contorted with rage and anguish. Behind him came Edmund, his expression carved from ice, and the Earl of Thornbury, radiating cold fury. Guests spilled onto the terrace, drawn by the unfolding scandal like moths to flame. "Is it true?" Sir Richard demanded, his voice breaking. "Tell me that vindictive Ashford girl is lying. And tell me I did not find my daughter in an embrace with a tradesman while her betrothed waited inside for the announcement of their engagement." Arabella raised her chin, finding courage from somewhere deep within. "It is true, father. I kissed Mr. Thorne. I did so willingly, knowing it was wrong, because I could not bear the thought of marrying a man who sees me as property rather than a person." Edmund's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "So the merchant was correct. You are a woman of loose morals, willing to debase yourself with anyone who flatters your vanity. Thank God I discovered this before shackles were forged. Consider our arrangement at an end, Sir Richard. I will not be made a laughing-stock by wedding a wanton." "Edmund, please!" Sir Richard pleaded, his face grey. "This is a misunderstanding, a moment of madness. The girl will be punished. She will see the error of her ways. The marriage can still proceed." "It cannot and will not," the Earl of Thornbury pronounced with finality. "A Blackwood does not form alliances with families tainted by scandal. Your daughter has made her choice, Sir Richard. She chose poorly. The consequences are hers to bear." The Blackwoods turned as one and swept back toward the house. Around them, the assembled guests whispered behind fans and gloved hands, delighting in the most spectacular scandal Hampshire had witnessed in a generation. Sir Richard stood motionless, watching his carefully constructed plans collapse. When he finally looked at Arabella, his eyes held a mixture of betrayal and devastation that cut deeper than any words. "You were all I had," he said quietly. "Your mother's greatest legacy, my hope for the future of this family, and you have thrown it all away for a moment of childish passion with a man who can offer you nothing of value." "Father, Do not speak to me. Sir Richard's voice was hollow. I cannot bear to look at you. Go to your room. We will discuss your future in the morning, though God knows what future you have left. He walked away, his shoulders bowed as though he carried the weight of the world. The guests dispersed, carrying their delicious gossip back to their homes and breakfast tables. Soon it would spread through every drawing room in the county, then across England, unstoppable as wildfire. Arabella was left standing in the garden that had been her sanctuary, now transformed into the scene of her destruction. Alexander remained, but she could not bear to look at him. "Leave," she whispered. "Please, just leave." "Arabella, go!" The word was a cry of anguish. "This was my mistake, my ruin. I will not drag you down with me." She ran then, back to the house and up to her room, leaving Alexander alone in the garden, where a single stolen kiss had ignited a fire that threatened to consume them both. The night that was supposed to mark the beginning of her triumphant future had instead become the night her entire world burned to ashes. And there was no going back. The morning after the ball dawned grey and oppressive, as though the heavens themselves mourned Arabella's downfall. She had not slept, had spent the night pacing her room, while the house slowly emptied of guests, each departing carriage carrying the scandal further into the countryside. By sunrise, she knew, every breakfast table within 30 miles would feature her disgrace as the primary topic of conversation. She was not summoned to breakfast. Instead, her lady's maid arrived with toast and tea, her eyes averted, her manner stiff with judgment. The servants knew. Of course they knew. Servants always knew everything first. At 10 o'clock, her father sent for her. She found him in his study, seated behind his massive oak desk. He had aged a decade overnight, new lines carved deep around his mouth and eyes. He did not invite her to sit. "I have spent the morning considering our options," he said without preamble, his voice devoid of warmth. "There are precious few. No respectable family will receive you. No man of quality will offer for you now. You are ruined, Arabella, completely and irrevocably." She stood silent, accepting the words like blows. "The merchant Thorn has sent a letter." Sir Richard gestured to a paper on his desk. "He offers to marry you immediately, to restore your honor insofar as that is possible. It is the only offer you are likely to receive. And you wish me to accept? I wish you had never been born." The words exploded from him, shocking in their vehemence. Sir Richard immediately checked himself, but the damage was done. "Forgive me, that was unworthy. But you must understand, child, you have destroyed everything. My business associations, my social standing, my hopes for this family. The Blackwoods have informed their friends of the circumstances. I am become a laughingstock. My own daughter, discovered in the arms of a tradesman. I am sorry, Father. Your apologies mean nothing." He looked at her with something approaching hatred. "You will not marry Thorn. I will not compound one disgrace with another. To wed a merchant after refusing a viscount would confirm every vile rumor spread about you. Then what am I to do? You will leave Hartwell Manor today. I have written to your aunt, Lady Catherine Pemberton. She resides in London and moves in circles where scandal is more tolerated. She has agreed to receive you. You will live under her roof and her rules. Perhaps in time, when the worst of this has passed, we may revisit the question of your future. You are sending me away. I am preserving what little remains of my reputation. I cannot have you here, a constant reminder of this disaster. Take your personal possessions. Your allowance will be reduced to the bare minimum. Lady Catherine will inform me if your conduct improves. Until then, you are no longer welcome in your own home." The finality in his voice was absolute. Arabella felt the last foundations of her world crumble away. "May I at least say goodbye to—" "No." Thorn departed at first light. He had the grace to remove himself from my house before I had him thrown out bodily. Sir Richard returned his attention to the papers before him, a gesture of dismissal more effective than words. "The carriage will be ready at 2 o'clock. Do not keep the horses waiting." Arabella retreated to her room in a daze. The next hours passed in a blur of packing. Her maid helped silently, folding gowns and wrapping shoes, the very items that had been purchased with such hope mere days ago, now symbols of catastrophic failure. At 2 o'clock precisely, Arabella descended the stairs for the last time as Miss Hartwell of Hartwell Manor. Her father did not emerge to see her off. The servants gathered in the hall, their faces carefully blank. She climbed into the carriage, and as it rolled down the drive, she did not look back at the only home she had ever known. The journey to London took 2 days. Arabella stayed at coaching inns along the way, attracting curious stares from other travellers who seemed to sense she was somehow marked, tainted. She kept to her rooms and ate sparingly, wrapped in grief and shame and a growing numbness that served as armour against unbearable emotion. London in late June was hot and crowded and overwhelming. The carriage navigated through streets clogged with vehicles and pedestrians, past shops and townhouses and parks where fashionable people strolled. Finally, they arrived in Mayfair at a tall, elegant townhouse that spoke of wealth and sophisticated taste. Lady Catherine Pemberton met Arabella in the drawing room. She was her father's older sister, perhaps 50 years of age, handsome rather than pretty, dressed in emerald green silk that suggested she cared little for widow's conventions, despite having lost her husband 5 years prior. Her grey eyes, so like Arabella's own, assessed her niece with shrewd intelligence. "So you are the great scandal of the season," Lady Catherine said without preamble. "Sit down, child. You look half dead." Arabella sank onto a settee, grateful to be off her feet after days of travel. "Your father has written me a letter full of hand-wringing and recrimination," Lady Catherine continued. "He paints you as a fallen woman of irredeemable character. However, I have learned to discount Richard's melodrama by approximately 70%. Tell me what actually happened." Something in her aunt's tone, matter-of-fact and entirely lacking in judgment, loosened the tight control Arabella had maintained. The story spilled out. Her betrothal to Edmund, the attraction to Alexander Thorne, the kiss in the garden, Charlotte's betrayal, the public disaster that followed. When she finished, Lady Catherine was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Your father is a fool." Arabella blinked in shock. "Oh, do not misunderstand. What you did was monumentally stupid. Kissing a man in the garden on the night of your engagement ball demonstrates a spectacular lack of judgment. However, your true crime, the one for which you are actually being punished, is that you dared to want something for yourself. You dared to choose passion over duty. And for that, the patriarchy must destroy you completely, as a warning to other women who might harbour similar rebellious thoughts." "Aunt Catherine, I'm well acquainted with men like Edmund Blackwood," Lady Catherine continued. "Bloodless creatures who view wives as decorative possessions. My own marriage was such an arrangement, perfectly suitable, absolutely suffocating. When my husband died, I discovered that widowhood offered liberties I had never imagined possible. No man to dictate my movements, my friendships, my thoughts. It was a revelation." She rose and moved to the window looking out over the street. "You are ruined, Arabella. There is no denying that. No respectable gentleman will offer for you. You will not be received in the finest drawing rooms. Your father's associates will cut you when you pass them in the street. By the standards of conventional society, your life is over before it has truly begun." "You are not making me feel better," Arabella said faintly. Lady Catherine turned, and her smile was fierce. "Good. Because I do not intend to comfort you with lies. I intend to show you that there are other ways to live. London is full of people who exist outside the strictest boundaries of propriety. Artists, writers, intellectuals, reformers, people who value ideas over bloodlines, talent over titles. My own circle includes poets who have never been presented at court, philosophers who would be considered dangerously radical by your father's friends, and women who have committed sins far worse than kissing a handsome merchant in a garden. You are suggesting I become, what? A bohemian. I am suggesting you become yourself. The intelligent, curious, passionate woman I see before me, rather than the decorative object society attempted to shape you into. Lady Catherine sat down across from Arabella. It will not be easy. You will face censure and gossip, but you will also experience freedom you have never known. The freedom to read what you wish, think what you wish, speak what you wish. The freedom to associate with people who value your mind rather than your marriageability. And what of Alexander Thorne? What of him? Do you love him, or was he merely a symbol of rebellion? Arabella considered the question honestly. I do not know. I barely know him. But I know that when I was with him, I felt alive in a way I never had before. He spoke to me as though my thoughts mattered. He saw me as a person, not a possession. Then perhaps in time you will have the opportunity to explore those feelings, Lady Catherine said. But first, you must become someone in your own right. Not Sir Richard's daughter, not Edmund Blackwood's rejected fiancée, not even Alexander Thorne's desperate choice. Simply Arabella, whoever she may be. For the first time since the catastrophic ball, Arabella felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. The weeks that followed were like nothing Arabella had experienced. Lady Catherine's circle was indeed composed of individuals who would have scandalized Hartwell Manor society beyond measure. There were painters who depicted subjects considered unsuitable for polite viewing, poets whose work celebrated passions society deemed better, left unmentioned, and bluestockings who wrote treatises on women's education and property rights. At first, Arabella remained silent during the gatherings Lady Catherine hosted, overwhelmed by conversations that ranged across topics she had never imagined discussing in mixed company. But gradually, encouraged by her aunt's pointed questions, she began to contribute her own thoughts. To her astonishment, people listened. They engaged with her ideas, challenged her assumptions, made her think more deeply than she ever had. One afternoon, at a literary salon in Lady Catherine's drawing room, Arabella found herself in passionate debate with a reformer named Mrs. Eleanor Hartley about women's access to higher education. Mrs. Hartley argued that women possessed the same intellectual capacity as men and should be permitted to study at universities. Arabella, drawing on her own experience of limited education, supported the position wholeheartedly. "You express yourself well, Miss Hartwell," said a male voice beside her. "Have you considered writing on the subject?" Arabella turned to find herself face to face with a man of perhaps 35, with keen blue eyes behind spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. Lady Catherine had introduced him earlier as Dr. James Reed, a physician who worked among the poor in the East End. "I have no training as a writer," Arabella replied. "Neither do half the people who publish, Doctor," Reed said with a smile. "What you have is passion and clarity of thought. Those are far more valuable than formal training." He paused. "My sister edits a periodical devoted to social reform. She is always seeking contributors, particularly women who can speak to the limitations placed upon their sex. I could introduce you if you are interested." Yes," Arabella heard herself say. "I would be very interested indeed." And so began another unexpected development. Dr. Reed's sister, Miss Louisa Reed, proved to be a formidable woman who ran her reformist periodical with efficiency and vision. She accepted Arabella's first tentative essay on women's education and published it under the pseudonym A Recovered Reputation, a choice that made Arabella laugh despite herself. Writing became a revelation. Arabella discovered that she could channel her anger and frustration and intellectual hunger into words that others might read and discuss. The work was challenging, requiring her to organize her thoughts and support her arguments with evidence and logic. But it was also deeply satisfying in ways her former life of social calls and embroidery never had been. Through the Reeds, Arabella's circle expanded further. She met reformers working to improve conditions in factories, abolitionists fighting to end slavery in the remaining British colonies, and activists advocating for political representation for the working classes. These were people driven by principles rather than profit, by vision rather than vanity. And then, one afternoon in August, 3 months after the disastrous ball, Dr. Reed appeared at Lady Catherine's townhouse with a companion. Arabella was in the library when the butler announced their arrival. She looked up from the book she was reading and froze. Alexander Thorne stood in the doorway. Alexander looked different from the man Arabella remembered. He was thinner, his face bearing lines that suggested sleepless nights and difficult decisions. But his grey eyes remained the same, and when they met hers, she felt the same jolt of recognition, the same sense that here was someone who truly saw her. "Miss Hartwell," he said quietly, "Dr. Reed mentioned you had become part of his sister's circle. I hope you do not mind that I persuaded him to arrange an introduction, that is, a reintroduction." "Mr. Thorne." Arabella rose, acutely aware of her racing heart. "I confess I am surprised to see you." "I imagine you are. After the disaster at Hartwell, I thought it best to keep my distance, to allow the scandal to die down before attempting contact. But I have thought of you every day since that night. I needed to know that you were well, that you had landed somewhere safe." Dr. Reed, tactful as always, murmured something about needing to speak with Lady Catherine, and withdrew, leaving them alone. "I am well," Arabella said. "My aunt has been extraordinarily kind. She has introduced me to a world I never knew existed, one where I am valued for my thoughts rather than my bloodline. I am glad." Alexander moved closer, his gaze searching her face. "I feared you might have been forced into some terrible compromise. When your father refused my offer of marriage, you offered to marry me." "Of course I did, immediately. But Sir Richard would not hear of it. He said he would not compound one disgrace with another by permitting his daughter to wed a tradesman." Alexander's voice held old bitterness. "I am accustomed to being dismissed by the aristocracy. But to know that my status prevented me from helping you when you needed it most, that was difficult to bear." "You are not responsible for what happened," Arabella said firmly. "I made my own choices. I kissed you knowing the risks, and I kissed you knowing the same. We are equally culpable, Arabella, or equally innocent, depending on one's perspective." The use of her Christian name sent warmth through her. "How have you been?" she asked. "Dr. Reed mentioned you have been working with him on some project." "Yes. After leaving Hampshire, I found myself without purpose. I had returned to England with a fortune, intending to use it to purchase respectability. But after the ball, I realized that respectability of that sort was forever beyond my reach. So I decided to use my resources differently." He smiled slightly. "I have been funding Dr. Reed's medical work among the poor. I have also been investing in manufactories that treat their workers with basic human dignity. It turns out there are worthwhile ways to spend money beyond attempting to purchase entry into society. That is admirable. It is self-serving, actually. The work gives me purpose, and it keeps me in proximity to the circle that includes your aunt, which meant I might eventually encounter you again." He paused. "Have you been happy, Arabella? Here in London, writing your essays, moving in these radical circles?" She considered the question. "I have been more myself than I ever was in Hampshire. Whether that constitutes happiness, I am not certain, but it feels important, it feels real. Then I am content. I told you once that you deserved something true. I'm glad you have found it, even if the path to it required such pain." They talked for hours that afternoon, catching up on the intervening months, discovering how their lives had changed and evolved. When Alexander finally took his leave, he asked permission to call again. Arabella granted it without hesitation. Over the following weeks, Alexander became a regular visitor to Lady Catherine's townhouse. He attended salons and lectures, contributed his perspective from years in India, and proved himself thoughtful and well-read on subjects ranging from economics to literature. He and Arabella fell into easy conversation, the intellectual connection that had sparked between them in the wisteria arbor deepening with each encounter. Lady Catherine observed their growing attachment with approval. "He is a good man," she told Arabella one evening, "lacking in pedigree but rich in character. You could do far worse. I'm not thinking of marriage, Arabella protested. Are you not? You light up when he enters a room. You seek his opinion on every subject. You have written 3 essays in the past month that directly engage with ideas he introduced in conversation. Lady Catherine's smile was knowing. You are falling in love with him, my dear. Or perhaps you have been in love with him since that night in the garden, and are only now admitting it to yourself. Before Arabella could formulate a response, the butler entered with a card on a silver tray. Lady Catherine glanced at it and her eyebrows rose. How unexpected! Show her in. Moments later, Charlotte Ashford entered the drawing room. She looked much as Arabella remembered. Pretty in a conventional way, blonde and delicate, dressed in the height of fashion. But there was something harder in her expression now, something calculating. Miss Ashford, Lady Catherine said coolly. To what do we owe this surprise? Lady Catherine, Miss Hartwell. Charlotte executed a perfect curtsy. I apologize for calling without prior arrangement, but I have news that I thought you should hear from me directly, rather than through gossip. We are not friends, Miss Ashford, Arabella said, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. You ensured that when you betrayed my confidence and destroyed my reputation. Why would you imagine I wish to hear anything you have to say? Charlotte had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. I know you think poorly of me, perhaps with cause, but you should know that my actions that night were not entirely malicious. I was used. Used? By whom? By Viscount Blackwood. Charlotte sat down uninvited, her hands twisting in her lap. He knew I had long envied your prospects. He approached me before the ball and suggested that if certain information about your character were to come to light, he might look more favorably upon my family's aspirations for an alliance. Arabella stared at her. You are saying Edmund Blackwood deliberately orchestrated my downfall? Not the kiss itself, that I assume was genuine, but he encouraged me to follow you when you left the ballroom. He suggested that I might find something worth observing if I ventured into the gardens. Charlotte's voice was bitter. He made it clear that if I provided him with cause to withdraw from the betrothal without loss of face, he would reward me. But why? Arabella demanded. If he did not wish to marry me, he could have simply declined my father's offer. Because he had already negotiated the betrothal. To withdraw without cause would have made him appear capricious. But if you were revealed as a woman of loose morals, he could withdraw with his reputation enhanced rather than damaged. And more importantly, he would be free to pursue another match, one that had recently become available. Miss Margaret Thornley, Lady Catherine said suddenly, the Duke of Ashford's daughter. I heard rumours she was recently released from an understanding with a Scottish earl. Exactly. Margaret comes with twice your dowry and direct connection to a dukedom. Edmund always intended to marry as advantageously as possible. You were acceptable until something better became available. The kiss merely provided him with the perfect excuse. Charlotte looked at Arabella with something approaching remorse. I was a fool to let him manipulate me. He promised consideration for my family. Instead, once you were ruined and he was free to pursue Miss Thornley, he forgot I existed. I have been used and discarded, just as you were. And now you come here seeking, what? Forgiveness? Alliance? Arabella's voice was hard. Information, actually. I thought you should know the truth. Edmund Blackwood is not the gentleman society believes him to be. He is a cold, calculating man who views people as chess pieces to be moved and sacrificed according to his ambitions. Charlotte rose. He is hosting a soiree next week, a pre-announcement of his betrothal to Miss Thornley. It will be one of the most significant social events of the season. All of society will attend to witness his triumph. Why are you telling me this? Charlotte's smile was sharp. Because I thought you might wish to attend. To show society that you are not broken. To demonstrate that his manipulation did not destroy you. Lady Catherine's invitation will certainly have been sent. She moves in circles that even the Blackwoods cannot entirely exclude. After Charlotte left, Arabella turned to her aunt. Did you receive an invitation? I did. I was planning to decline. Edmund Blackwood is everything I despise about the aristocracy. Do not decline, Arabella said, decision crystallizing. Accept, and bring me with you. Arabella, are you certain? Facing him publicly. I am tired of hiding, tired of allowing his actions to dictate my life. He orchestrated my ruin to serve his ambitions. I will not give him the satisfaction of cowering in shame. Arabella's eyes blazed with determination. I will attend his soiree. I will face him and all of society, and I will show them that Arabella Hartwell is not defeated. Lady Catherine's smile was fierce with pride. Then we shall need to ensure you look absolutely magnificent. The week preceding the soiree passed in a flurry of preparation. Lady Catherine commissioned a gown from London's finest modiste, a creation of midnight blue silk that brought out the colour of Arabella's eyes, with embroidery of silver thread that caught the light with every movement. Diamonds borrowed from Lady Catherine's extensive collection glittered at Arabella's throat and ears. On the night of the soiree, as they prepared to depart, Alexander arrived at the townhouse. I heard you planned to attend Blackwood's event, he said to Arabella. I wanted to be there as well, to support you if you will permit it. You would face society's censure for me. I would face far worse than censure for you, Arabella. I thought you knew that by now. They arrived at Blackwood House as a trio. Lady Catherine, with her formidable reputation as an eccentric but wealthy widow, Alexander as a successful merchant of growing influence, and Arabella as the woman who refused to be destroyed by scandal. The grand ballroom was ablaze with candlelight and crowded with the cream of London society. Conversations faltered as they entered. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. Arabella held her head high and moved through the crowd as though she had every right to be there. Edmund Blackwood stood near the centre of the room, a pale, frightened-looking young woman at his side. Miss Thornley, Arabella assumed. The girl could not have been more than 18, and she looked terrified by the grandeur surrounding her. Edmund's face, when he caught sight of Arabella, was a study in shock and anger. He had clearly not expected her to have the courage to appear. He excused himself from Miss Thornley and approached, his expression schooled into false courtesy. Miss Hartwell, what an unexpected surprise. Lord Blackwood, Arabella replied smoothly. I hope you do not mind my attendance. Lady Catherine received an invitation, and I could not resist the opportunity to witness your impending nuptials. Congratulations, by the way. I understand Miss Thornley comes with a considerable fortune. Edmund's eyes narrowed. You are not welcome here. Am I not? How strange. I have an invitation, and I have committed no crime beyond falling short of your exacting standards. Surely you are not so petty as to hold that against me. You humiliated yourself and your family. You displayed a shocking lack of moral character. Did I? Or did I simply escape an arrangement that would have made both of us miserable? Arabella smiled, and there was steel in it. Tell me, Lord Blackwood, does Miss Thornley know that you deliberately orchestrated the downfall of your previous betrothed? That you manipulated Miss Ashford into spying on me because you needed cause to withdraw from our arrangement without damage to your reputation? Edmund's face went white. I have no idea what you're talking about. Of course you do not, just as you do not care that you destroyed my father's social standing and my reputation to serve your ambitions, just as you do not care that poor Miss Thornley will spend her life as an ornament to enhance your consequence, valued only for her connections and her dowry. You overstep, madam. No, Lord Blackwood, I simply speak truth, something you would not recognize if it struck you in the face. Arabella's voice carried across the room, and guests nearby had stopped, even pretending not to listen. I'm grateful, actually. Your manipulation freed me from a future of suffocating propriety and empty conversation. It allowed me to discover that there is more to life than being a decorative possession for a man who values bloodlines over humanity. So truly, I thank you. She turned to leave, but Edmund caught her arm. You will not embarrass me in my own home. Remove your hand, Alexander said quietly, appearing at Arabella's side. His voice was calm, but there was danger in it. Now. Edmund looked at Alexander with contempt. The merchant. Of course you would attend as her lapdog. Two failures, clinging to each other in mutual degradation. I am no failure, Alexander said. I built my fortune through my own efforts. I employ hundreds of workers whom I treat with dignity and fair wages. I fund medical care for the poor and invest in enterprises that improve lives rather than merely extracting profit. What have you done, Lord Blackwood, beyond inheriting a title and manipulating people weaker than yourself? A crowd had gathered now, watching the confrontation with fascinated horror. This was the scandal of the evening, far more entertaining than any polite announcement. You are nothing, Edmund hissed. No name, no title, no breeding. You will never be anything more than a tradesman, and she will never be anything more than a disgraced woman who threw away her chances at respectability. You are wrong, Arabella said clearly. I have become something far more valuable than respectable. I have become free. Free to think, to write, to associate with people who value ideas over inheritance. Free to choose my own path. Can you say the same, Lord Blackwood? Or are you simply fulfilling the role designated for you by accident of birth? She turned to Alexander, placing her hand on his arm. Shall we depart? I find the company here rather tiresome. As they walked toward the exit, Lady Catherine beside them, the crowd parted. Some faces showed disapproval, but others, particularly among the younger women, showed something that might have been admiration or envy. Here was a woman who had been ruined by society's standards and yet stood before them unbroken, even triumphant. Outside, as they waited for their carriage, Arabella found she was shaking. The confrontation had required every ounce of courage she possessed. Alexander took her hand gently. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite fear. You faced the man who destroyed your reputation and made him look small in front of all his peers. That required extraordinary bravery. I could not have done it without you, Arabella said, looking up at him. Without you and Aunt Catherine and the entire circle of people who have shown me that there are different ways to live, different definitions of worth and success. Arabella, Alexander said quietly, I need to tell you something. I've been waiting for the right moment, but I realize there may never be a perfect time. I love you. I have loved you since that afternoon in the wisteria arbor when you asked about India and listened to my stories as though they mattered. I love your intelligence, your courage, your determination to forge your own path, despite every obstacle society places before you. Alexander, I know I am not what you were raised to expect. I have no title, no great family name, but I can offer you partnership, respect, intellectual companionship, and love. I can offer you a life where you are valued for who you are, not what you represent. If you will have me, I would be honored to marry you. Not to restore your reputation, that ship has sailed, but because I cannot imagine facing the future without you beside me. Arabella felt tears prick her eyes. You must know that marriage to me will close doors for you. Society will never fully accept you if I am your wife. Then society can keep its doors closed. I have no interest in admission to clubs that would reject the woman I love. Alexander cupped her face in his hands. What do you say, Arabella Hartwell? Will you marry a merchant with no breeding but considerable devotion? Yes, Arabella whispered. Yes, Alexander Thorne, I will marry you, not because I need restoration or rescue, but because I love you, because you see me as I truly am and love that person, because with you I can be entirely myself. He kissed her then, there on the street outside Blackwood House, and Arabella felt the same fire that had ignited in the garden months before. But this time there was no fear, no shame. Only the certainty that she had chosen correctly, that she had found something genuine in a world built on artifice. When they finally broke apart, Lady Catherine was smiling through tears. Well, she said briskly, I suppose we have a wedding to plan. The announcement of Arabella's betrothal to Alexander Thorne created almost as much scandal as the original kiss had done. Society was divided in its response. The conservative elements viewed it as confirmation that Arabella had been a woman of loose morals all along, now cementing her disgrace by marrying a tradesman. But other voices, particularly among younger people and those in Lady Catherine's reformist circles, saw it differently. A woman choosing love and partnership over the empty respectability of a conventional match. Miss Louisa Reed published an essay in her periodical, unsigned but clearly written by Arabella herself, titled On Choosing One's Own Destiny. It argued that women should be permitted to marry for affection and intellectual compatibility, rather than being treated as property to be disposed of for financial and social advantage. The essay created considerable discussion in drawing rooms across London. Sir Richard, when informed of his daughter's impending marriage, sent a terse letter. He would not attend the wedding. He would not provide any dowry beyond what was strictly required by law. Arabella had made her choice, and she would live with the consequences without further assistance from him. The letter was signed simply Sir Richard Hartwell, without even the customary "Your father." Arabella wept when she read it, mourning the relationship that might have existed between them if circumstances had been different. But Lady Catherine held her and reminded her that some losses, however painful, were necessary for growth. "Your father loved a version of you that never truly existed," Lady Catherine said gently. "He loved the obedient daughter who would secure advantageous connections through a profitable marriage. He never knew or valued the intelligent, passionate woman you actually are. That is his loss, Arabella, not yours." The wedding was held in September in a small church in Bloomsbury. It was nothing like the grand society wedding that would have marked Arabella's marriage to Edmund Blackwood. There were perhaps 40 guests, all from Lady Catherine's circle of reformers, intellectuals, and artists. Dr. Reed stood up with Alexander. Miss Reed served as Arabella's attendant. Arabella wore a gown of cream silk, simple in design but elegant, with flowers from Lady Catherine's garden woven into her hair. She carried no formal bouquet, just a small clutch of roses and lavender. As she walked down the aisle toward Alexander, she felt no doubt, no fear, only profound certainty. The vows they exchanged were traditional in form, but radical in meaning. When Alexander promised to honor and cherish her, Arabella knew he meant honoring her mind and cherishing her spirit, not merely valuing her as a decorative possession. When she promised to love and respect him, it was a promise between equals, not the subordination of woman to man that characterized most marriages. At the wedding breakfast afterward, held in Lady Catherine's townhouse, toasts were made that celebrated not just the union of two people, but the principle of choosing one's own path in defiance of social convention. Mrs. Hartley, the educational reformer, raised her glass and said, "To Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, may your marriage be a model of intellectual partnership and mutual respect. May you demonstrate to the world that love based on true understanding is worth infinitely more than matches made for material advantage." The celebration continued late into the evening. There was music and laughter, conversation ranging across politics and philosophy and art. It was the antithesis of the stiff formality that would have characterized Arabella's wedding to Edmund, and she treasured every moment of it. As the last guest departed, Lady Catherine embraced her niece. "You have chosen well, my dear. Not an easy path, but an authentic one. I am proud of you." "I could not have done any of this without you," Arabella replied. "You showed me that there were alternatives to the life I thought was inevitable." "You showed yourself. I merely provided a safe harbor while you discovered your own strength," Lady Catherine smiled. "Now go. Your husband awaits, and you have a new life to begin." Alexander had taken a house in Kensington, elegant but not ostentatious, with a large library and a garden that reminded Arabella pleasantly of Hartwell. As he carried her across the threshold that night, She felt she was not leaving her old life behind, so much as stepping fully into a new one she had chosen rather than having chosen for her. Their wedding night was gentle and passionate by turns, a discovery of each other that was as much emotional as physical. Afterward, lying in Alexander's arms, Arabella felt a peace she had never known in her carefully ordered life in Hampshire. "Do you have regrets?" Alexander asked quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "Only that we did not meet sooner," Arabella replied, "before the disaster at Hartwell, when I was still the naive girl who thought obedience was virtue. I would have loved that girl too. But I love this woman more, the one who found courage to rebuild her life from ruins, who discovered her own voice and learned to use it. I love you for seeing her, for seeing me." Arabella raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "What shall we do, Alexander? With our lives, I mean, now that we are married and have scandalized society to its core?" "We shall do whatever we wish," he replied. "I have been thinking of expanding my investments in India, perhaps establishing trading partnerships that benefit local merchants rather than merely extracting resources. It would require travel, months, perhaps years, in Calcutta and Bombay." "You wish to return to India?" "Only if you wish it. I will not make decisions that affect us both without your partnership. That was your father's error with Edmund, treating you as though your opinion on your own future was irrelevant." Arabella considered. "I should like to see India, to experience the places you described in the wisteria arbor that afternoon, to see the world beyond England, to learn how other cultures live and think. Then we shall go. We will establish ourselves there for a time, build something of value, and return when we are ready." Alexander pulled her close. "Together, Arabella. Every decision, every adventure. Partners in all things." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Hampshire. It was not from Sir Richard, but from the housekeeper at Hartwell Manor. Sir Richard had suffered an apoplectic fit. He was alive, but much weakened, and the physician held little hope for his recovery. Despite everything, Arabella felt compelled to go to him. Alexander accompanied her, making the journey back to the place where their story had begun with such disaster. Hartwell Manor looked exactly as Arabella remembered, beautiful and imposing and filled with memories both sweet and bitter. The servants, when they admitted her, were clearly uncomfortable, unsure whether to treat her as the mistress's daughter or a scandalous interloper. Sir Richard lay in his bed, a shadow of the robust man she remembered. The apoplectic fit had stolen much of his strength and left his face drawn and grey, but his eyes were clear when Arabella entered his room. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course I came. You are my father." Sir Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I have had much time to think these past weeks, lying here, unable to move, facing my own mortality. I have thought about your mother, about what she would say if she could see what I have become. Father, let me speak, Arabella. I may not have another chance." He drew a labored breath. "Your mother was much like you, intelligent, spirited, curious about the world. When I married her, I promised to cherish those qualities, but over the years, I forgot that promise. I began to see her, and eventually you, as assets to be managed rather than people to be loved. I tried to mold you into something you were never meant to be, and when you refused to fit the mold, I cast you aside." Tears ran down his weathered face. "I was wrong, child, monstrously wrong. You deserved better than Edmund Blackwood. You deserved better than the life I planned for you. And you certainly deserved better than to be disowned by your own father when you dared to choose your own path." Arabella knelt beside the bed, taking her father's hand in hers. "You did what you thought was right, what society taught you was proper. Society is often cruel in its propriety. I see that now, too late to repair the damage." Sir Richard squeezed her hand weakly. "Can you forgive me, Arabella, for failing you so completely?" "There is nothing to forgive, Father. We are all prisoners of the world we are born into. You did your best with the understanding you had. You are generous. More generous than I deserve. He looked past her to where Alexander stood by the door. Mr. Thorne, you are the man who married my daughter. I am, Sir Richard, Alexander said, moving closer. Are you good to her? Do you value her as she deserves to be valued? I do, sir. She's my partner in all things, my intellectual equal, the person I most admire in the world. I would rather die than diminish her in any way. Sir Richard nodded slowly. Then I am glad she chose you over the life I would have forced upon her. Take care of my daughter, Mr. Thorne. She is worth more than all the titles and estates in England. He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Arabella wept for him, for the relationship they might have had if circumstances had been different, for the reconciliation that came too late to rebuild what had been broken. But she also felt a measure of peace, knowing that he had understood at the end the value of what she had chosen. Sir Richard left Hartwell Manor to Arabella in his will, along with the remainder of his fortune. It was a final acknowledgement that she was, and always had been, his heir in more than just name. Arabella and Alexander discussed at length what to do with the estate. They ultimately decided to keep the house, but rent it to a family that would care for it properly. The income would fund their travels and Alexander's philanthropic ventures. Someday, perhaps, they would return to live at Hartwell. But for now, they had a wider world to explore. Before they left England for India, Arabella made one final journey. She travelled to Lincolnshire and requested an audience with Edmund Blackwood, now married to Margaret Thornley. He received her in his study, his expression wary. "Miss Hart, Mrs. Thorne, this is unexpected. I will not stay long, Lord Blackwood. I came only to say 2 things. Arabella met his gaze steadily. First, I forgive you for what you did, the manipulation, the orchestrated ruin. I forgive you because holding anger serves no purpose, and because your actions, however cruel, ultimately freed me to find genuine happiness." Edmund looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I acted in accordance with my family's best interests. You acted with calculated cruelty, but that is something you must reconcile with your own conscience." Arabella paused. "The second thing I came to say is this: treat your wife well. Value her for more than her dowry and connections. Give her room to grow and think and be more than merely decorative. If you cannot love her, at least respect her humanity. She deserves that much. You presume to lecture me on marriage? I presume to speak as someone who has experienced both the prison of a strategic match and the freedom of a genuine partnership. I know the difference. I wish for Lady Blackwood that she might someday experience the latter, even within the constraints of your union." Edmund had no response to that. Arabella left Lincolnshire feeling lighter, as though she had released a burden she did not know she still carried. 6 months later, Arabella stood on the deck of a ship approaching Calcutta. The Indian coast rose before them, exotic and overwhelming, exactly as Alexander had described. The air was thick with humidity and unfamiliar scents, spices and salt water and vegetation unlike anything in England. The harbour teemed with vessels from every corner of the world, and the city beyond was a riot of colour and noise and life. "What do you think?" Alexander asked, coming to stand beside her. "I think it is extraordinary," Arabella replied. "I think I am extraordinarily fortunate to see it." They established themselves in Calcutta, in a house that blended British and Indian architectural styles. Alexander resumed his business ventures, but with Arabella as his full partner, consulting her on every major decision. Together, they invested in enterprises that treated local workers fairly, that paid reasonable wages and maintained safe conditions. It was less immediately profitable than exploitative practices, but more sustainable and far more ethical. Arabella continued her writing, now with the entire subcontinent as her subject. She wrote essays about the clash of cultures, the complexities of colonial administration, the rich intellectual and artistic traditions of India that British society largely ignored. Her work was published in reform periodicals back in England and gradually gained a following among readers interested in more nuanced perspectives on the empire. She also became involved in educational efforts, working with missionaries and local reformers to establish schools for girls. The work was challenging, often frustrating, but deeply meaningful. Every girl who learned to read represented a small victory against centuries of tradition that limited women's opportunities. Their social circle in Calcutta was as eclectic as Lady Catherine's had been in London. British expatriates who had gone native, Indian scholars and merchants who navigated between two worlds, Portuguese traders, Armenian financiers, and reformers of every nationality, united by their desire to make the colonial system slightly less oppressive. At dinner parties in their home, conversations ranged across languages and topics with dizzying speed. Arabella found herself discussing Mughal poetry with Indian intellectuals, debating trade policy with Scottish merchants, and learning about Hindu philosophy from a Brahmin scholar who found her curiosity refreshing rather than inappropriate. One evening, nearly a year after their arrival in India, Arabella received a letter from England. It was from Miss Thornley, Lady Blackwood, written in a careful, almost timid hand. "Dear Mrs. Thorne, I hope this letter finds you well. I write to you, though we have never been properly introduced, compelled by circumstances that you alone might understand. I have heard of your work in India, your writings on women's education, and your partnership with your husband in business ventures. I confess these accounts fill me with a longing I have no right to feel. My own marriage is everything society deems successful. I want for nothing material, but I am permitted no occupation beyond embroidery and social calls. My husband is not cruel, but neither is he interested in my thoughts or opinions on any subject of consequence. I think often of the stories I have heard about you, how you were ruined by scandal, and yet rebuilt your life into something meaningful. I wonder if there is hope for those of us trapped in golden cages we entered willingly. I wonder if it is too late to become something more than decorative. Forgive me for writing thus to a stranger, but you are the only person I know who might understand this peculiar imprisonment of being given everything except the freedom to be fully human. Your obedient servant, Margaret Blackwood Arabella, read the letter multiple times, her heart aching for the young woman she had never met. She showed it to Alexander that evening. "What will you reply?" he asked. "I will tell her the truth," Arabella said, "that it is never too late to seek meaning and purpose, that even within the constraints of a conventional marriage, there are ways to expand one's life, through reading, through charitable work, through cultivating friendships with people who value intelligence over pedigree. I will tell her that she is not alone, that many women feel as she does, and that change, however gradual, is possible." She wrote a lengthy response to Lady Blackwood, full of practical advice and genuine empathy. It was the beginning of a correspondence that would last for years, a lifeline for a woman trapped in circumstances Arabella had narrowly escaped. Other letters arrived from England as well, from Lady Catherine, full of news from London's reform circles and proud updates on Arabella's growing reputation as a writer, from Dr. Reed, describing his expanding medical practice and mentioning that donations from the Thornes had allowed him to open a second clinic in the East End. From Miss Reed, reporting that the periodical's circulation had doubled and that Arabella's dispatches from India were their most popular feature. Even Charlotte Ashford wrote a brief note expressing regret for her role in Arabella's downfall and admitting that her own life had not proceeded as she had hoped. She had married a country squire with modest means, a perfectly respectable match, but one that left her facing the same empty social round she had once envied Arabella for escaping. Arabella replied to Charlotte with more generosity than the woman perhaps deserved, suggesting that any life could be made meaningful with sufficient determination and creativity. Whether Charlotte would heed that advice remained to be seen. As the seasons passed, monsoons and dry weather, festivals and fasts, Arabella and Alexander's partnership deepened. They were not merely husband and wife, but true companions, sharing work and dreams and the daily texture of life with complete honesty. They argued occasionally, sometimes fiercely, about business decisions or philosophical questions. But their arguments were conducted with respect, each valuing the other's perspective, even in disagreement. 2 years after arriving in India, Arabella discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had seen childbirth in India, had witnessed its dangers, particularly for women without access to good medical care. But Alexander engaged the finest physician in Calcutta, and Lady Catherine sent a midwife from London who specialized in difficult deliveries. Their daughter was born on a sweltering June evening during the monsoon season. They named her Catherine Elizabeth, Catherine for Lady Catherine, who had offered sanctuary when Arabella most needed it, and Elizabeth for Arabella's mother, who had died too soon to witness her daughter's transformation. Holding her daughter for the first time, Arabella felt the weight of responsibility and possibility. This child would be raised differently than she had been. Catherine would be taught that her worth extended far beyond her marriageability. She would be educated in literature and mathematics, philosophy and science. She would see her mother working alongside her father as an equal partner. She would grow up understanding that women could choose their own paths, that intelligence and curiosity were virtues to be celebrated rather than concealed. What kind of world will she face? Arabella wondered aloud one evening, watching Catherine sleep in her cradle. A better one than the world you faced, Alexander replied, because of people like you, like Lady Catherine and Dr. Reed, and everyone fighting for change. The world evolves slowly, but it does evolve. By the time Catherine is grown, perhaps women will have more opportunities than you did. Perhaps the notion that a woman's mind is worth valuing will seem obvious rather than radical. That is my hope, Arabella said, that her life will be less constrained than mine, that the scandal that defined my youth will seem quaint to her generation. When Catherine was 6 months old, a letter arrived that made Arabella laugh with genuine delight. It was from Edmund Blackwood, stiffly formal, requesting information about the schools Arabella had established in India. His wife, he wrote, had expressed interest in charitable work related to women's education and had suggested that Mrs. Thorne's endeavours might serve as a model. Arabella replied with comprehensive information about funding, curricula, and the challenges of establishing educational institutions in a colonial context. She included a personal note to Lady Blackwood, commending her for undertaking meaningful work and offering to correspond more extensively about the practicalities of such ventures. It was not friendship exactly, and it could never erase the past. But it was a gesture of grace, an acknowledgement that even those who had harmed her deserved the opportunity for growth and change. 3 years after arriving in India, Arabella and Alexander returned to England for an extended visit. They wanted Catherine to know her great-aunt and to see Hartwell Manor, the place where both her parents' old lives had ended and their true lives had begun. Lady Catherine was older now, her grey hair gone white, but her spirit remained indomitable. She fell instantly in love with her great-niece, declaring Catherine to be everything a girl should be: curious, energetic, and entirely unintimidated by adult conversation. At a gathering in Lady Catherine's townhouse, Arabella found herself surrounded by old friends and new admirers. Her writing had gained considerable readership, and people wanted to hear about her experiences in India, her thoughts on reform, her perspective on the changing world. A young woman approached her tentatively during the evening. She could not have been more than 20, well-dressed, but with an anxious expression that Arabella recognized intimately. "Mrs. Thorne," the girl said, "I hope you will forgive my forwardness, but I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? Whatever for?" "For showing that there are alternatives to the life society prescribes for us. I am engaged to marry a man I have met twice, selected by my father for his connections and fortune. I have been told I should be grateful for such an excellent match. But I am not grateful. I am terrified of spending my life as someone's decorative possession." The girl's eyes filled with tears. Your story gives me hope that even if I make what everyone considers a terrible mistake, life does not end, that there are other ways to find meaning and happiness. Arabella took the girl's hands in hers. What is your name? Miss Eleanor Whitmore. Miss Whitmore, I will not advise you to flee your engagement. That is a decision only you can make, and it comes with consequences you must be prepared to face. But I will say this, you deserve a life of genuine feeling and intellectual engagement. You deserve a partner who values your mind as well as your dowry. And if you cannot find that within conventional society, there are other circles, other ways of living that honor what you are rather than what society wishes you to be. How does one find these other circles? Arabella smiled. Begin by reading. Educate yourself beyond what is considered necessary for a lady. Seek out people who value ideas over propriety, reformers, artists, intellectuals, and most importantly, never apologize for your intelligence or curiosity. They are your greatest strengths, not flaws to be concealed. She saw Miss Whitmore several more times during their stay in England. The girl became a regular attendee at Lady Catherine's salons, absorbing new ideas with the eagerness of someone discovering that her private rebellious thoughts were shared by others. Whether she would eventually proceed with her engagement or find the courage to choose differently remained to be seen. But Arabella took satisfaction in knowing she had offered perspective that might make whatever choice the girl made more truly her own. Before returning to India, Arabella and Alexander visited Hartwell Manor. The house was occupied by a genteel family with 4 children who had turned the once formal estate into a home full of life and laughter. Walking through the gardens, Arabella led Alexander to the wisteria arbor, where they had first truly met. The arbor looked exactly as she remembered, purple blooms cascading down in fragrant profusion. They sat together on the stone bench, and Arabella felt the weight of memory and transformation. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked quietly. "The kiss that destroyed your old life?" Arabella considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain it caused my father, though we found peace before his death. I regret that I hurt people through my choices, but regret the kiss itself. Regret choosing you, choosing this life we have built together. Never. Not for a single instant." "We have been fortunate," Alexander said. "Not everyone who defies convention finds happiness on the other side." "No. But happiness was never guaranteed, regardless of what path I chose. I might have married Edmund and been miserable. I might have remained a spinster under my father's roof, slowly withering into bitterness. At least this way I chose my own misery or happiness. At least this life is authentically mine." "Ours," Alexander corrected gently. "This life is authentically ours." Arabella leaned against him, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the wisteria blooms. She thought of the naive girl she had been, standing in this same garden 3 years earlier, longing for something she could not quite name. That girl had been destroyed in scandal and shame, but from her ashes had risen this woman, writer, partner, mother, reformer, someone who had learned that the fire of scandal, however painful, could forge strength rather than merely consuming. "Tell me," she said to Alexander, "what shall we do next, after we return to India?" "Whatever we wish," he replied, as he always did. "Perhaps expand the schools, perhaps establish a publishing venture to amplify Indian voices. Perhaps simply raise our daughter and continue building the life we have chosen together. All of that sounds perfect. Even the quiet parts, the daily routines, the ordinary moments between grand adventures. Especially those," Arabella said, "because they are genuine, because they are ours, because every morning I wake beside you and know that I chose this life freely, that no one dictated my path or defined my worth. That freedom, Alexander, is worth more than any title or social standing or conventional success." They sat in the wisteria arbor until the sun set and the evening stars began to appear. Then they returned to the house, to their daughter, and their plans, and their beautifully unconventional future. The Duke had stolen a single forbidden kiss in a garden. And from that moment of passion and scandal and ruin, two people had built something that society could never understand but could not diminish. A life of genuine partnership, intellectual companionship, shared purpose, and enduring love. They had been consumed by fire, it was true, but they had also been forged by it into something stronger, freer, and more authentically themselves than either could have imagined in that first stolen moment under the wisteria blooms. And that, in the end, was its own kind of triumph. If you are listening to this story, do not forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.